Hello, my name is Bill Coughlin, and welcome to the First Person Civil War podcast, which retells the stories of the soldiers and officers on the ground in the battles of the Civil War. This episode focuses on the commander of the 14th United States Colored Troops Regiment, and how the regiment bolstered Union cavalry on the battlefield as they faced the famed cavalry of Nathan Bedford Forrest outside the town of Pulaski, Tennessee. The source for this episode are Colonel Thomas J. Morgan's experiences in his book entitled Reminiscences of Service with Colored Troops in the Army of the Cumberland, 1863 to 1865. Colonel Thomas J. Morgan hailed from Indiana and was in his final year at Franklin College when the Civil War began. His service in the Union Army began early as he joined the 7th Indiana, which was a 3-month regiment, as a private and participated in the fighting in what is now West Virginia for the length of that enlistment. In August 1862, Morgan again volunteered and served as a first lieutenant in the 17th Indiana, which saw service in the Western Theater. After the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, Morgan became outspoken in Army circles of taking things to the next step. And he wrote, "With the strong conviction that the Negro was a man worthy of freedom, possessed of all essential qualities of a good soldier, I early advocated the organization of colored regiments, not for fatigue or garrison duty, but for field service." In October 1863, having applied for a position in the colored service, I was ordered before the Board of Examiners at Nashville. On 1 November 1863, Morgan was ordered to Gallatin, Tennessee, to organize and command the 14th United States Colored Troops. The camp at Gallatin already had several hundred men who enlisted in the Union Army, and it was now Colonel Morgan's job to organize and train them. He began with interviews to include medical examinations, and discovered that many had experience in camp life in the Union and Confederate armies. A typical interview went as such, and he said, "I remember picturing one bright-eyed fellow, the hardships of camp life and campaigning, and receiving from him the cheerful answer, 'I know all about that.' I then said, 'You may be killed in battle.' He instantly replied, 'Many a better man than me has been killed in this war.' When I told another one who wanted to fight for freedom that he might lose his life, he replied, 'But my people will be free.'" The 14th United States Colored Troops Regiment numbered 1,000 men by February 1864 and was permanently stationed at Camp Whipple, Chattanooga, from this time until August 1865, but the regiment did campaign across Tennessee and Georgia. The 14th United States Colored Troops first saw action at Dalton, Georgia on 15 August 1864. Alongside the 51st Indiana, the 14th United States Colored Regiment participated in an engagement with General Wheeler's cavalry, which successfully protected the lines of communication to Sherman's army further south in Georgia. The next month, General Nathan Bedford Forrest conducted a raid in northern Alabama and Middle Tennessee, which included cutting lines of communication and engaging with Union forces, starting on 21 September 1864. By the 27th of the same month, Colonel Morgan was ordered to Pulaski, Tennessee by rail with the 14th and 16th United States Colored Troops regiments. This is according to Union reports. He did not identify the other colored regiment. These two regiments were sent to assist Union General Rousseau, who was the commanding officer in the vicinity of Forrest's raid. That morning, a running cavalry battle began approximately 6 miles outside of Pulaski, with Forrest's cavalry gradually pressing the Union cavalry back to the town. Colonel Morgan recounted of their arrival. "Finding the general," who was Rousseau, I said, "I am ordered to report to you, sir." And he replied, "What have you?" "2 regiments of colored troops." Rousseau was a Kentuckian and had not much faith in Negro soldiers. By his direction, I threw out a strong line of skirmishers and posted the regiments on the ridge, that is, east side of the town, in good supporting distance. Rousseau's men retired behind my line, and Forrest's men pressed forward until they met our fire. Keep in mind that this battle was several months after the Battle of Fort Pillow, where Forrest's cavalry massacred colored troops after they surrendered. The men of the 14th United States Colored were aware of that incident and who it was they faced on the battlefield. Colonel Morgan continued. The firing was growing hotter, and balls were uncomfortably thick. At length, the enemy, in strong force, with banners flying, bore toward us in full sight, apparently bent on mischief. Pointing to the advancing column, I said, as I passed along the line, "Boys, it looks very much like a fight. Keep cool. Do your duty." They seemed full of glee and replied with great enthusiasm, saying such things as, "They can't whip us," etc. When Forrest learned that Rousseau was reinforced by infantry, he did not stop to ask about the color of the skin, but after testing our line and finding it unyielding, turned to the east and struck out toward Murfreesboro. According to Union and Confederate reports, it was early afternoon when the 14th and 16th United States Colored troops formed for battle on the east side of Pulaski. There they stayed until the fighting stopped in the evening. According to Major General Rousseau's reports on the fighting, he seemed to gain a modicum of appreciation for what the colored regiments did in the fighting. At 1:15 p.m., 27 September, he sent a report to Nashville, the headquarters of the Army of the Cumberland, about the ongoing engagement. And he said, "Infantry all here and formed in line, ready for the enemy. Cavalry have just completed the retrograde movement and formed on the left. Pretty brisk skirmishing. Enemy advancing. We are ready and anxious. We shall attack. Troops here, except those brought with me, meaning the 14th and 16th United States Colored troops, are worthless, the most demoralized I have ever seen. The enemy are moving round in our rear, 3,000 men and 6 pieces of artillery, it is reported." Even Forrest's report, after completing his raid, confirms the flanking movement around Pulaski and his inability to gain any upper hand. By the evening, General Rousseau sent a second wire to Nashville of the results of the battle. Skirmishing was kept up all day. This evening, the enemy advanced a heavy skirmish line to within a short distance of ours. It is my impression that their main lines will be advanced tonight, and that they intend to attack in the morning. With the day's fighting done, this second wire by General Rousseau smacks of a calmer head. He continues the report, detailing his follow-up operations against General Forrest's continued raid. But there is no more complaining about demoralized soldiers who aren't his own. Of the several wounded sustained by the 14th United States Colored troops, Colonel Morgan recounted of one such exchange between his men. An incident occurred here illustrating the humor of the colored soldier. A spent ball struck one of the men on the side of the head, passed under the scalp, and making nearly a circuit of the skull, came out of the other side. His comrades merely declared that when the ball struck him it sang out, "Too thick," and passed on. Given Colonel Morgan's wording in his recount of the battle, I must assume that he read the first report General Rousseau sent to Nashville, which included the initial assessment of his 2 regiments. General Rousseau no doubt had the events of 24 September on his mind when he found Colonel Morgan and his men. On that day, a Union force manning a fort in Athens, Alabama, consisting of elements from the 106th, 110th, and 111th United States Colored troops, as well as a detail from the 3rd Tennessee Cavalry, U.S., and an artillery battery, were surrounded by Forrest's cavalry in order to surrender. Colonel Campbell, the commander, decided to surrender the fort and his 538 men and 33 officers without a fight. This no doubt weighed on General Rousseau's assessment of other United States Colored troops regiments. However, it seems this surrender was not an action approved by the men and officers of these regiments. On 17 October 1864, while at Enterprise, Mississippi, the officers that were surrendered signed a statement that condemned Colonel Campbell's surrender. They spoke of the fighting spirit of the men and stated, "We do not hesitate to say over our signatures that the surrender was uncalled for by the circumstances, was against our wishes, and ought not to have been made. We also respectfully request that a thorough and immediate investigation of the above statement be made, that our names may not be placed in the list of cowards in the general summing up of our nation's history." This document contained the signatures of 32 officers from all surrendered commands, from major to second lieutenant. Whatever opinions the general had of United States colored troops, he still used the 14th and 16th United States colored troops to defend Pulaski, Tennessee. General Rousseau had to form a new line of battle with infantry he was unfamiliar with, and then anchor his men to that line of battle, all while still engaging Forrest's cavalry. Luckily for him, the 14th United States colored troops was a battle-tested unit, and the men of the United States colored troops regiments stood their ground. Colonel Thomas J. Morgan compiled his war experiences into his book entitled Reminiscences of Service with Colored Troops in the Army of the Cumberland, 1863 to 1865. Other reports come from The War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate Armies, Series 1, Volume 39, Part 1, Reports. Thank you for listening to the second episode. If you like what you heard today and would like to hear more episodes in the future, please consider supporting us financially by donating at the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. Again, that is firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. The donation link is located at the top of each web page. While there, you can find information on where I found these first-person accounts, other source material, and links to further episodes of the podcast. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.